by the music director artistically deficient, or whether perhaps the dismissal was not warranted.
And of course, it's the contract that the musicians have that specifies how these things are going to be worked out.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
So when the negotiation for the contract comes up, it may be crucial to fine-tune this stuff, or even in some cases overhaul it, so that it gives the musicians more of a voice.
We have had peer review in our industry since it started with the National Symphony back in about 1964. And we try to keep a sort of record of when dismissals are upheld or overturned. And roughly in 80% of the cases, our own musicians are upholding the decisions of music directors, which means that, in our view, the system is working.
You know, as it pretty well ought to, because if it didn't, what would the situation be? You'd have music directors who are completely out of control, making extraordinarily arbitrary decisions.
Right.
And that doesn't seem like a good working relationship, no matter how the contractual issues get resolved.
Absolutely, and as a longtime symphony musician, anyone can talk about that. The quality of the product is often very much related to the morale of the orchestra, and I have seen orchestras where there have been some serious battles, either with the music director, and in some cases you can really hear that in the product. And when you have a good relationship, a good working relationship in which there is mutual respect between the music director, it's not to say that the music director won't address, they have to, artistic issues, but when there is fair treatment, and I think that's the key word, that the orchestra feels better and plays better, in my opinion.
So something worth going back to is your comment that you work so much with smaller orchestras which do not give full-time employment to the musicians, and so these musicians are driving around their region playing, and you said 3, 4, 5, 6 orchestras. So this is, I think, something that's not well enough known, because when we read in the national press, sometimes even in the music press, about musicians, contracts, negotiations, it's always the big orchestras. And we imagine that the issues are going to be whether somebody in Cleveland or Philadelphia is going to make as much as somebody in Chicago or New York, however these things work out. But that leads me to ask you, how many musicians, what percentage of people you could call full-time orchestra musicians are employed in the kind of situation you describe, where they're driving around playing in many orchestras, as compared to the ones who sit full-time in one?
Well, I don't know exactly what percentages. I will tell you that by our orchestra conference, the International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians, which is the larger budget orchestras, has some 45 to 50 orchestras, and most of those are to varying levels in full-time capacity. Right. Another conference of the AFM, which is known as the Regional Orchestra Players Association, now has, I believe, some 72 orchestras, and from within those groups there are some that are making somewhat a full-time living, but by and large I would say most of them do fall in the category we call driving for dollars, and if they're not actually driving, they're finding themselves piecing together other kinds of income, such as teaching, universities, or other endeavors. Right.
And in many ways, these people are the backbone of the classical music industry, or the orchestra part of it. I would say that. They're the people that, from most places in the country, if you go to a concert, these are the people you're going to see playing.
For example, nearby we have an orchestra in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which includes some of the finest freelancers from New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And we might as well get the acronyms out there. ICSOM, the conference that represents the larger orchestras, and ROPA, the conference that deals with the smaller ones. So, when you come in, do you actually take part in the negotiations yourself?
Yes, I attend every meeting.
You attend every meeting.
Yes.
And are you more likely to speak, or does the majority of speaking come from the people from that orchestra, or does it vary?
My view with negotiations is that it needs to be a group effort. In some ways, I am considered as the chief spokesperson at the table, but I instruct committees that I want them all to speak and all of them to contribute, so that there is never a sense that it is my agenda, which it never is. It is always their issues, and that it is a group effort. And as I said earlier, I can't possibly have the knowledge of the local details as these people. So we have a very good, what I call interplay, back and forth, where if an issue requires something of a national focus, I will emphasize that, and they will, as the local committee, will emphasize their local issues, and it works very well.
So the outsider, maybe the uninformed outsider, may well be saying at this point, okay, 3 different interests at play in these negotiations: the musicians themselves, yourself from the national union, and then the local union. So I can remember, I'm playing devil's advocate here very consciously, but when I worked as a pop music critic for the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner back in the late 80s, there were union negotiations for our contract, and we thought that the guy from the National Union Newspaper Guild, or whoever represented us, was a jerk and not really looking out for our interests at all. So somebody's going to say, doesn't the same thing happen? That you find yourself quarreling with the local music, or tensions develop, and with the local?
Well, yes, we have, shall we say, spirited dialogue many times. But I basically have my rule, and what I was taught by my mentor, Lou Waldeck, is that it is, at the end of the day, we do represent the musicians, and it is what they want. There have been many settlements and many decisions by a group of musicians that I have personally disagreed with, but I would fully support to the extent that I could, because I knew that that is what they wanted. I come into them and I'd say, as a negotiator and as a professional with my experience, I think you are best served if you did this, or you could do this or this, but if you do this, you might get into trouble, but ultimately it's their decision.
And do you ever find yourself in a position where the musicians are making such a big mistake about something that you have to discuss with them very, very spiritedly?
Well, if they are making a mistake, let's say something that would have legal implications,
exactly,
then you have an issue with the local union. In other words, if, say, a group of musicians tried to put something in the contract that would take arbitrary or capricious action against their colleagues, then certainly not only I, but the local, because there are legal issues involved, such things. But if they are doing something which is, in my view, ill-advised or could have ramifications, then I simply inform them of what I view are the ramifications, but again, it is their decision.
It reminds me a little bit, and I hope this comparison is not too far off base, of what happens to me as a composer when somebody's playing my music. There's a time in the process where you begin to see what they are going to do. Mm-hmm. And it can be a combination of what they're capable of, where the limits of their abilities are reached, but it's more often going to be, if you're dealing with solid professionals, that they just have a certain approach to music. And at a certain point, maybe the approach that you feel suits your piece diverges from that, but if you are wise and also a considerate human being,